Legendary! That's right, today we are going to be talking about legendary games. Now, I don't mean games that are legendary as in they're so amazing and they've stood the test of time and all that kind of stuff, although I feel that some of these should fit that category. Today, I'm going to be talking about games that are based off of myth and legend. So the stories from ancient people or somewhat modern people, whatever the story happens to be. So on that note, this is actually going to be a little bit different than most of my other videos. Rather than looking solely at gameplay and things of that nature and how easy or difficult it is to pick up, I won't be focusing entirely on that, but rather more focused on the storytelling aspect and how well some of the myth and the legend from these different stories is integrated into the game. So with that, go ahead and suit up. It's time to get started with a couple of honorable mentions. My first honorable mention is a game that comes to us courtesy of Steve Jackson Games, one of my favorite quirky humor developers responsible for Munchkin. And the game that I have today is Illuminati. This is a really fun game about global domination, basically. You play as one of 7 famous Illuminati groups, and the idea is that you control cards that represent various aspects of the world, be it the CIA, Texas, California, nerds, secret masters of fandom, video games, all sorts of crazy stuff. And the idea is that you vie for control of all these different things and become the most powerful Illuminati in the world. Now, why is it just an honorable mention and not on the main list? Well, the simple fact for that is that the Illuminati has become such a myth-legend combination thing that a lot of people really still believe all of this stuff. And I'm not saying that it's not true, I'm saying that I don't know. It seems like it could be a possibility that groups like this do exist. So, for now, I'm just going to keep it in the category of it's probably a legend and a myth thing, but maybe it's not. So that's why Illuminati is one of my honorable mentions as a myth and legend game. My second and final honorable mention comes to us courtesy of Wizards of the Coast and is part of one of their massive intellectual properties at the moment, and that is Dungeons & Dragons Legend of Drizzt. I thought to myself, what better game to have in a list of legendary games than a game that actually has the word legend in its name? Well, that's pretty obvious, but this is an honorable mention. Why is it not on the main list? Well, the reason for that is that we're starting from a place of lots and lots of story. This is basically lore upon lore. There is the lore of Dungeons & Dragons, and within that, the lore of Drizzt, the character. So it's sort of like Inception, but with myth, if that makes any sense. And that's why it's an honorable mention rather than one of the main games, because this in and of itself is a story within a story. Not a bad thing, and certainly not a bad game. This is a wonderful tile building game, one of the best types of games to play by yourself, if I may say so myself. And I really enjoy the theme. I am a very avid player of D&D, or at least I was. I don't really have time anymore. But this is one way that I can sort of stay connected to D&D, at least 4th edition. 5th edition is coming out soon. I don't know if I'll be able to play that. But that's why D&D The Legend of Drizzt is one of my honorable mentions. At number 5, I've got a game based off of stories from Greek mythology, and it's a game that I had never heard of until I actually saw it in the store. It is called Mythic Battles. This is a really fun game that's for either 2 or 4 players. It's either 1 versus 1 or 2 versus 2. And it's a game that's very, very similar to things like Memoir 44 from Days of Wonder, where each individual person or team are controlling an army of creatures of all different sorts. And in this case, the two sides are Hades and Athena. And you're vying for control of a city in this case. Now, as far as the actual myth goes, this isn't really part of any so-called canonical myth from Greek legend and Greek lore, but at the same time, they did a lot of things right with it. They have a lot of different creatures, such as the Minotaur, Pegasus, all of those kinds of things within the game that you can use, and it's just a very interesting context for a battle game. And it's done very, very well, but the one thing that I don't really like is that it's very complex, just like any war game. There are a lot of small detail rules that you have to remember, such as terrain blocking line of sight, and small powers that each of the individual creatures have, all that kind of stuff. It makes it relatively difficult, but I mostly like it for the theme that it has, which is very, very good. Greek mythology, my personal favorite. And that's why Mythic Battles is my number 5. At number 4 is one of my favorite cooperative games, and it also happens to be one that's based on a great set of stories. Many of you probably know Arkham Horror. Now, this game is based obviously off the Lovecraftian mythos about Cthulhu and all of those elder gods, all that kind of stuff. Great set of stories, wonderful writing. If you haven't read his works, you really should. They're pretty amazing, and some of the most original horror genre writings in history. And just very, very interesting stories, and this game actually takes all of that and condenses it and makes it so well, and it is so true to the stories and the feeling that you have when you read them, like the feeling of pure terror when you see the tentacles of Cthulhu coming at you and all of those kinds of things. It's an incredible adaptation to a great set of myths and legends and stories from a wonderful author. And that's why Arkham Horror is my number 4. At number 3, I've got another game that comes to us courtesy of Fantasy Flight that is based not on Greek, but Norse mythology. A very interesting thing that is often overlooked, and it is Beowulf The Legend. This is a really, really wonderful game that's actually competitive, and the idea here is that you play as one of Beowulf's companions, and you go around and you do stuff from all of the myths, such as killing Grendel and all of those kinds of things. Now, why do I like it so much as a myths game? Is because, again, just like with Arkham Horror, this does a great job of putting together a lot of story into a single game and making you able to, in a sense, learn what a lot of the myths and the legends and stories of Beowulf were, and a lot of what his accomplishments were. That being said, it's a Fantasy Flight game. It's very well made. All the parts are very well constructed. It's very well balanced. And it's just a wonderful, fun game to play, just like many, many, many others. But for purposes of this, it does a great job of conveying all of the myth and legend behind the man that was Beowulf. So that's why Beowulf the Legend is my number 3. At number 2, I've got another cooperative game that might not necessarily be cooperative that comes to us courtesy of Days of Wonder. It is Shadows over Camelot. Now, this is a game that I've talked about just a couple of times. It's one of the first games that I actually talked about. And as many of you know, it is obviously about the Arthurian legends. That is, Sir Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. And it is a very, very fun game, and it's really nice because you have the potential of having the traitor in the midst, just like something like Battlestar Galactica. Very similar, but with swords rather than lasers and Cylons. And in this case, you're talking about all of the famous quests that all of the knights went on, which were the Holy Grail, finding Excalibur, fighting in tournaments, getting Lancelot's armor. All of those kinds of things are all in here. In addition, this has an expansion that I unfortunately don't own, which was, I believe, Merlin's Company, if I'm not mistaken, which added the possibility of more traders, and it also added powerful new cards that either seriously screwed you or potentially very seriously helped you. But all that being said, just like many, many games with Myth and Legend, this does another good job of having the characters and the stories and the accomplishments of the people involved with all of this. And one reason that I really, really like Shadows over Camelot is just like with Arkham Horror, in the case of Arkham Horror with the Mythos cards, in this case with the so-called black cards, a lot of those involve additional characters from the legends and additional events that actually occurred during those legends. So that's why Shadows over Camelot is my number 2. At number 1, we have my favorite game from my favorite genre of myth, which happens to be Greek mythology, and the game is Cyclades. Now, this is a wonderful, wonderful game that actually takes place in the islands where the Cyclopes lived in the Iliad and the Odyssey, which starred our good friend Ulysses on his way to and from the Trojan War. Now, in this case, what you're doing is actually something that many, many, many people in ancient Greece would do, which was vie for influence from all of the gods. Now, don't get me wrong, a lot of cities, a lot of towns, all the temples, typically were only involved with a single god. But many people worshipped all the gods. For example, in the summer, you would definitely want the help of Demeter so that your crops would grow. But if you're going on a fishing trip, you're going to want the help of Poseidon. Most people tried to pray to all of the gods. And in this case, that's exactly what you do. You try to gain influence over all of the individual major gods at the beginning of each round. And each god gives you a different boon of various sorts, depending on which god it is. They'll give you the ability to make new units, or you get a priest, all sorts of different stuff. So in the end, what happens is there's a lot of different ways that you can win that are all based on the individual mythos and the individual sort of responsibilities of the gods, which in my opinion makes it that much better of a game. And it's a lot of fun. It does take a little bit of time to learn and to play, but once you have it, it's a great game based on a great set of mythology. And in addition, there's actually an expansion for this, which I can't remember the exact name off the top of my head, but it involves Hades, which is great because that adds a whole new dimension to the entire thing. Not only the game itself, but also the game as a pathway for the myths, which I think is wonderful as far as the storytelling goes. So, that is why Cyclades is my number 1 mythology and legend-based game. Alright, that's it for me. I hope that you enjoyed my video on my top 5 favorite games that are based off of myth and legend. If you know of any others, please go ahead and post them in the comments. And if you enjoyed my video, please give me a like and a subscribe so that you can see more videos like it, as well as other videos on all sorts of different topics ranging from video games to politics. And once again, I hope that you enjoyed it. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.